Hey, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of the Road to the ProcureTech Cup, the show for procurement professionals who want to know the art of the possible with procurement technology. I'm your host, Joël Collin-Demers. It's a busy day in the Collin-Demers household this week as there's a PE day. There's more dogs around than there should be, so if you hear a yelp, that's why. And I was also fixing something, and bang, I got the wrench on my forehead, so that's what's going on my end this week. I hope you guys are well. And we've got a really cool and exciting show prepared for you today on how to make supplier relationship management tools work with your existing systems, whether that's an ERP or a source-to-pay suite. We've got you covered in this conversation today. So just before we get to the conversation and our guests, as you know, week by week, we're bringing folks on the show to teach you how to be successful with ProcureTech. Last year, we focused a lot on demos and showing you functionality. So you can always go back and watch those videos, although the space is moving so quickly that, some of them are already outdated in the sense that functionality has moved and evolved to another level with all this artificial intelligence talk that you're surely exposed to. So today we've got a Trust Your Supplier coming on to discuss SRM architectures. Last week we did business cases for intake and orchestration technologies. Next week we're talking about SRM again with Graphite, and we're doing that all the way to April, where we'll have our virtual conference first edition, and I'll show you and tell you how to get tickets in the next couple of weeks here as we get things set up for that. So without further ado, agenda for today: what is a supplier relationship management tool? Let's make sure we're starting off on equal footing. We'll get Trust Your Supplier to introduce themselves as a solution category champ for the year. So they're going to teach us about SRM the whole season, along with Graphite Systems. And then we'll get into the conversation, right, for today, which is how do we use SRM systems with our current systems in conjunction with to add value and to remove the confusion that can come from having multiple sources of supplier data. We'll talk about, supplier management, or the traditional way of managing suppliers, and how that's evolving into supplier relationship management, especially with everything that's going on geopolitically speaking, right? More risk, more uncertainty, changes to policies, changes to international relationships, which are all having impacts on the architecture that you should have for supplier data. So really excited to touch on those 2 points. And before I do that, though, I'm going to bring in PK and Gary from Trust Your Supplier. So thanks so much for being here, guys. How's it going?
It's going great, Joel. Thanks for the opportunity here today. We're really looking forward to sharing our insights with the group here, and appreciate the opportunity to do this.
Likewise, Joel. Yeah.
I was going to say, I feel blessed because we've got 2 CXOs with us from Trust Your Supplier today, right? So we'll get the information straight off the press. All right, so here, let's start off just by level setting, right? So what is a supplier relationship management tool? I'm going to give it my view, and then Gary, I'll let you chime in, right, with nuances that you see. So I always prepare or present it in this ProcureTech market map that I've come up with, where at the top you really have strategic procurement, and then operational procurement, which is our bread and butter is procurement, spend analysis, what's on the credit card statement, all the way to how do we maximize the value with category management, how do we execute on that with sourcing events and contracting events, and then how do we put that in front of our requesters in the business so that they can buy with requisitions, with goods receipts, with invoices from suppliers, and we can get those paid with accounts payable. And then on the bottom half, which is what we'll focus on, right, is the SRM tool, which happens in parallel to that, which is we need to onboard suppliers, classify, qualify them, get their data, get them in their systems, manage risk, manage performance, and then end relationships when we get to the end of it, right? And so depending on where you are in the relationship, you're going to have different amounts of data needed, different types of data needed, different risks that you're going to want to manage. And then, we have the blue circle in the middle, which is the coordination and the intake of all that, because you could come in and need a sourcing project as a requester, or you could buy straight from a catalog. And so what we're seeing, and I think that's why it's circled in blue, and you can confirm or infirm, Gary, is that intake and process orchestration is sort of becoming something that all solution categories are offering, right? Because if you don't have it today, your first tool you implement is something like Trust Your Supplier or an SRM tool, it's something that you want to have that unique front door for procurement. And I think we're all realizing that it's very, very, very valuable. So on that note, that's how I think of supplier relationship management. But Gary, I'd love you to chime in and complement that.
Yeah, Joel, you're bang on. Intake management, process orchestration, these are imperatives today. Yeah, organizations can't operate without them. Gone are the days here where you can do this. You can ignore this, or you do this, via spreadsheets and emails. This has to be part of your maturation process as you move into an SRM tool, is to have that intake management, so you can really understand from a supplier perspective who that partner is, what they're all about, what risks they're presenting, how they're going to deliver the product, the service, and how they're going to help your organization and how you're going to partner effectively. This is all extremely important. And as we talk about the integration, that integration is going to continue to happen all the way from the intake side all the way through the process. So I think it's really important that people understand that these are not silos, but they're very collaborative and symbiotic relationships that have to coexist to have an effective process.
Beautiful. So, yeah. And so what is the Trust Your Supplier version of that?
So TYS is really, you want to think about it as a 360 control center, right? So it's built in a network model. Right now, traditionally, every buyer asks suppliers for the same documents over and over and over again. Some suppliers have, had to send over their W-9 so often they could do it blindfolded, right? So suppliers are doing these things so frequently, and there's a lot of frustration, low value work. And so what TYS is, it's a network, and a network that allows a supplier organization to create what we call it a digital wallet. It's really a supplier golden record. That's a common term in the industry now. And what we do uniquely, we think, is we take that supplier provided information, the firmographics about the supplier, all the various questionnaires we ask them to answer, the documentation, like that tax document, like the certificate of insurance or whatever it might be, all their policies, whether it be a code of conduct or a data privacy policy or, whatever it might be. We store that in this digital wallet. It happens to be on blockchain technology in our case. And then we marry that with third-party information from these authoritative parties like D&B, Moody's, EcoVadis, Rapid Ratings, organizations like that we all know. So you can get the InfoSec, you can get the ESG, you can get the financial health. And then when you're in the Trust Your Supplier user experience under one pane of glass, you'll see all of that information about the supplier. And, looking back at what we talked about a few minutes ago with intake, you can see that information before you even engage the supplier in some cases. So you can make decisions about onboarding or about sourcing before you actually get to a point of engagement with the supplier. So all of this is moving very fast in the industry. And we like to think that, our model helps organizations understand risk and make those very fast decisions in a low touch way as they move forward. And buyers, and what we call buyers, but basically the supplier's customer, are able to consume information in that wallet very quickly as it is available, and continually update it and continually validate it. So this is a huge value proposition for organizations. I like to tell people it's like LinkedIn, right? Where you create your profile one time and you can share it with many. It just doesn't have all the selfies.
Yeah. And can I, as a supplier, right, could I choose to share it with folks that or buyers that aren't necessarily using TYS either? Like, can I make that knowledge public to some other via API, like to some other system?
We do have API capability, absolutely. So, no network is an island these days. And so, that content can be communicated, to the supplier directly through the UX, or there is an opportunity to move that information throughout the ecosystem via our API capabilities.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And so when we think about, what the platform is all about, and this is commonplace in the industry today, right? But what we've done is we've put this under one roof. Data governance is probably, one of the most unheralded capabilities that organizations need to have. You have to have clean data, especially with the advent of the AI engines that we're all migrating to. right? We know that data needs to be clean, and I've been in this business more years than I'm going to be able to share with you guys. Dinosaurs ruled the earth when I started, so I've never seen a vendor master where the information was accurate, current, and complete, right? So we all know that data needs to be governed properly to drive all of the AI and insights and data analytics that we're doing today. Of course, we need to be able to find and onboard suppliers effectively. We need to manage the risk both on the way in the door and once they're in the room, and then on the way out the door, right? So we need to manage risk all throughout the life cycle. The way to do that is through workflows and automation, which we've developed and we continue to develop and put in our tool set that allows organizations to selectively say strategic or high-risk suppliers need to follow a different path than suppliers that are low risk. So the photographer for the Christmas party is going to go through a completely different path than the supplier that's providing semiconductors to the manufacturing floor, right? We give the ability for risk scoring, so you can objectively evaluate your supplier side by side, and then we monitor this information on a day-to-day basis. You want to know if the supplier has been sanctioned, right? You don't want to get up and read your news feed in the morning and find out your favorite supplier's CEO is in an orange jumpsuit, right? So that information is very important to understand on a day-to-day basis, and we've all seen, here recently that. With the advent of AI, fraudsters are leveraging that technology perhaps better than anyone. And so we've seen a lot of cases where supplier payments have been hijacked essentially. And so we have capability to mitigate that kind of fraud.
Awesome. Yeah. And I feel like it's, you hit on the nerve with me at the very beginning where you said, like, essentially I understood it like, as a vendor governance, vendor data governance isn't sexy, right? And so I'm very curious to see how you're making it sexy, because it is definitely super important. And so so anyways, on that note, right? I think here you wanted to touch on the different integrations or the different dimensions, right? That you need to consider when you're doing that.
Yeah, so that would be a tall challenge making data sexy, Joe, but I'm going to leave that one alone. So we touched a little bit about risk intelligence, right? And so when we think about risk, risk can be evaluated in a number of different ways, and there's different pillars of risk that are important to understand. What we've done is we've combined data elements that we consume directly from the supplier via questionnaires. It's the normal mechanisms that organizations have used over time to collect information. And then again, we've kind of glued that to getting authoritative data from experts in the industry, right? So all these logos here, I'm sure are very familiar with everyone here in the audience, whether it be LexisNexis, EcoVadis, of course, some of the big brothers in the industry like Moody's and Dun & Bradstreet have a whole host of risk data offerings. So we consume all that information, and whether it's financial, sanctions, cyber, compliance, whatever it might be, we're able to bring this information under that pane of glass and provide insights around risk. So at the end of the day, you just want to know as much about your supplier as you can, right? Because you're going to be constantly making decisions. And no 2 days in supply chain are alike. We know that. So what's a great relationship today could be a poor relationship tomorrow, only because the aspects of the supplier have changed that now present risk to your ability to continue to do business with them, right? And so, that's what really procurement is all about, right? And if we think about business really boiling down to problem solving, part of problem solving is removing risk, right? And so that's what we try to do.
Yeah, and I think it conceptualizes the problem very well, which is, there are thousands of sources of data out there, and you need a way to bring them together to get that consolidated picture of, what is happening with that supplier, depending on where you are in the life cycle with them. So I appreciate that intro. If you want to look at supplier demo for Trust Your Supplier, you can scan this QR code as well, right? I think the fine folks at TYS will be more than happy to take some time with you to bring you through the platform. As I said last year, we focused on doing that on the show, but I wanted gear this year to get on how to be successful, or to talk about how to be successful. So make sure to reach out if that's of interest to you. But now this second phase is like, who TYS is, how do we use these types of systems that are collecting this data from various internal, external sources, first-party data, third-party data, and bringing them all together? How do we plug those in with our current systems to get to the actual outcomes that, Gary, you were discussing earlier on in the show, right? So PK, I think you wanted to bring us around, what those challenges are and the impacts and how to deal with them.
Absolutely, Joe. And there are really, I think, 4 pieces to this to unpack this question. One is to really understand where the organizations are, most of the organizations are today, and then sort of that. If you look at that picture today, it's really siloed data, a lot of manual workflows. Even today, many organizations have working from spreadsheets and ERP systems. Their sourcing systems have different data. Their contractual systems have very different data. And so in many cases, the problem gets even more compounded when they are geographically spread. Even within an organization, we know we have worked with clients with 80 different ERP systems. So I think the risk is very low in terms of late risk detection. Risk awareness is very low, so you detect your risk much later in the game. That leads to a lot of increased exposure, and we have had situations where customers have had those exposures discovered during the process itself, which has been extremely helpful for them. The second piece of this is the fragmented data actually causes poor data integration, and it's just going to cause more compound itself, as Gary was mentioning, with AI and other pieces coming. So that inconsistent data visibility leads to, again, obscures your risk insight in terms of where your risks are in terms of your supplier base. The third aspect of this is there's still a lot of manual process, as I mentioned earlier, and that leads to a lot of higher cost in terms of remediation after sourcing. You just realize, oops, we made this problem. We spent all this time getting through the sourcing process. Now we find that this person has a sanctions or this person has a financial issues. So that they to not only kind of go back into that whole cycle time, but also understand the downside, reputational risk that it presents to the organization. Then there is slower workflows in terms of delays in approval that also creates cycle time delays and slowers your decisions. And at best, they can also lead to poor decisions. And then obviously the other part is many organizations are right now do a one-time check and then they fire and forget. And that causes a lack of limited monitoring, leading to sort of inefficiency, because things can go very quickly from red to yellow, or green to yellow, or green to red, of any one risk dimension that can really impact. So even if at the time of sourcing you didn't have a problem, you need to know that.
Oh, PK, I think you pressed on the mute button.
So I think So am I coming okay?
Yep.
Okay. So if you go to the next slide in terms of where this is headed, if you see the supplier management is evolving, we believe that, and many organizations, progressive organizations, are beginning to adapt this idea that it's no longer about just supplier information management. It's evolving to include risk dimension in a very intentional way. Supplier risk management, it includes the supplier collaboration, where you need to be having that relationship on an ongoing basis with your strategic suppliers in a meaningful way. And you can discuss about your performance management. Underlying that is, do you have the right performance data and you have the right risk data? So being able to combine all that in a cohesive manner and being able to express that and provide that unified view is becoming significantly more important, not only for the regulatory portion of the organization, but also for your traditional strategic category management and other procurement professionals to have that view. And in the way that we think about this is a segment that has to play with the existing ERP system that you showed earlier in your chart on the top side.
Yep.
Because with increased scrutiny on supply chains and tariffs and things like that, there is a very strong desire to find alternate sourcing and pre-screen the suppliers in terms of their financial risk, their sanctions exposure, their ESG exposures, etc. And so it's becoming significant, and we will really dive a little bit deeper on that aspect of the entry point, although there may be other entry points here in terms of contract management, traditional payables, invoice, etc. So but we will take a little bit deeper dive on one of those segments and go into it. So if you go to the next slide. So one key area that's very clearly evolving in the industry is this idea of a pre-screening or a pre-engage. So if you look at the left side, it's really your traditional process of onboarding from an RFQ, a new supplier, and then managing them through the offboarding process. As we just discussed, there are a whole range of issues there in terms of the um, discovering the risk after the fact and managing that risk after the fact. So most organizations are now beginning to move this process to the left side. So they're calling it pre-screening or pre-engage, where prior to basically awarding an RFQ, they would want to screen the suppliers and manage that in terms of the risk in terms of those dimensions. And then the journey would start from an ERP system, but then you would have that view upfront about how to manage that, and then subsequently, obviously, manage that process through the life. So we will see how we have done that for a couple of our clients. If you go to the next slide.
Yeah, and
This,
PK, just before we hop in there, like I have a question around, or an observation, and I don't know if you concur, right? But around the fact that I think a lot of people would love to have all this data up front, but there's a cost to getting it. And I think that cost is probably going down, given what we see with technology advancement. But we kind of I've been in so many sourcing exercises where we go, we'll get that data later, right? Like if they're actually somebody we want to do business with. And then to your point, you could get down a path and have to come back and go some other direction because you didn't have access to that pre-engagement data. So I'm definitely seeing that out on the field. But is that kind of what you're seeing too, right?
absolutely. I think one of the I'll tell you a story. One of our clients actually during the engagement process discovered that one of their existing suppliers had a sanctions issues and exposure. Once that data point was revealed to them, it was very clear to them that they needed to do a full view of their supplier base. So in many cases, I think the insight is very revealing for the even the prospective buyers and the buyers in terms of the not only causes a reputational risk for them, but also causes a significant downside risk in terms of penalties and things like that. So I think it's a part of the thing that we are continuing to see progressive customers understanding that. And I think the more and more the market matures, we will see that becoming an important aspect of the pre-boarding consideration. So just to loop back here in terms of how we work with an existing sourcing system in this case, it's a 5-step process. Simply put, the journey obviously starts like any other organization. You would invite a supplier from an ERP system as part of any initiative that you're doing, and then you get the initial set of prospective suppliers that you want to award an RFP to. At that point, the system would send that to TYS. The TYS will basically triangulate that against the multiple risk dimensions that the organizations really care about. Typically, we see sanctions, financial risk, ESG being some dimensions. Cyber also comes into the picture. You triangulate that and then create a payload basically saying red, green, or yellow based on the current prospective suppliers. And then they get fed back into the ERP system. And that then triggers the appropriate qualification. So the huge benefit, because it fits seamlessly with the existing S2P systems in terms of sourcing workflows. Secondly, it boosts the efficiency to kind of really do actionable insights so you can pre-discover and then manage that risk, as opposed to going down the contracting minutia and then figuring out the problems. And so there's a lot of time save and a cost save there. And then you obviously get a 360 view upfront, and we can obviously further qualify with questionnaires and standardized workflows to even further improve that. And the most important part is that this is not a one-time thing. It's a continuous monitoring beyond that, so you can continuously extend that visibility down into your in life and then offboarding's life cycle of that supplier. So we believe that this type of an integration puts a less change inertia on the existing organizations, and at the same time drives them closer to having that holistic value of their supplier risk and their impact on their business.
Yeah. And I would imagine, like where it says ERP system, right, on that left-hand side box, it could be a P2P system, it could be a
Absolutely.
system, right? I think it's what I'm understanding is that you're plugging into an existing onboarding process, right? And serving up the insights to be able to take the right decisions at each point in time in that relationship.
That's absolutely right. It goes back to the picture we saw a couple of slides back, where the entry point can be any one of those entry points.
Yeah, and I would imagine we actually have a question in the chat here from April who's asking who actually owns that supplier data in an ERP integrated world? Because based on my earlier question as well, like if I'm in sourcing, I'm going to need different amounts and types of data than if I'm in transacting, right? I already signed a contract with them and I just want to get their transacting info. So what's your view on like who owns the supplier master in this brave new world?
So we believe, as Gary was mentioning earlier, that you need to have a golden record in terms of being able to do insight, and you want to do it holistically across the organization. However, we recognize it's a journey for each organization. And so we want to make the journey compatible with their maturity and their ability to sort of transform. And so that reality is very much in light. So we have to provide them with the kind of the steps, milestones, where at each point we drive that incremental value for that organization, because that's also something we have to keep in consideration. Just going back with one example that I presented earlier, there are 80 ERP in one organization. So who owns the data? Well, I mean, that's your guess as mine, right? So we have to kind of make sure in that scenario that we are driving value with one organization and then using that as a yardstick to kind of drive that change within the broader organization.
Yeah, and I think we're not talking about deployment planning on this this specific edition of the show, but it will come up right around SRM tools, and in that scenario where it's very, very fragmented, that answer you may have multiple answers at once, right? And you're working to convert everybody to the single source of truth answer with a tool like TYS, I would imagine.
Fantastic. So I think, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say we're getting close to time here. So, it seems like everything's an API call, right? Just before I get into the recap, like, from that three and four steps, right? It's really whether it's a sourcing system, a procure to pay suite, an ERP system, you'll be able to call TYS, right? At any point within that process with where you are in that process and the information that you need to augment your decision making at that point in time and get served up the data in the format that you need for that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the key in terms of being able to put that connection so that you can manage that process in a very automated fashion.
Very cool. And so if we recap here really quickly, we mentioned it at the outset of the show that there's increased risk, increased uncertainty for global supply chains. I know I'm feeling it with my clients. I'm sure you guys are feeling it watching the show, right? Shifting policies, shifting trade relationships. The T word, which PK dropped earlier on as well, tariffs, which is keeping us on our toes. And so that's just the reality that we live in. And honestly, I think, based on my amateur look at geopolitics, I feel like it's not going to get any better anytime soon in terms of stability. And so we need to have these organizational capabilities to manage risk, to manage agility, right? And that comes with having access to very high trust data on our supplier base. And so, you touched on it earlier, Gary and PK, around the fact that you see, the access to this data or the desire to have access to this data shifting to the left or coming earlier and earlier in that supplier lifecycle, and the weight of those activities and that data, the need of that data increasing over time.
Yeah. And
finally, that's driving the need to get fit for purpose, single source of truth solutions, where we can put all of our supplier data in, get it deduplicated, enriched with the multiple data sources that you showed us, monitoring risk post relationship engagement, remediation of issues that may come up, and then being able to, as we saw, distribute the data back to the systems that need it at different points in time. So I had one last question actually on that last point, which is as you enrich data, right? Can I also bring my own data sources to TYS? Like you showed us a collection of them.
Absolutely.
How does that work?
Absolutely. In many organizations, they keep risk data in their data warehouse. So in that scenario, you have to support an intake model to bring in their custom risk scores also into the system.
Beautiful. Yeah, and you know, we touched on it a couple of times, but I've hammered in the past of like the solutions of the future are open solutions, API based, right? Which kind of leans into the question I asked at the front end around, you know, can suppliers serve up data to other customers that may not be on TYS? So those are all things that I would encourage viewers to think about when they're thinking about supplier management. And just as we wrap up the show here, on the left-hand side, your procurement newsletter. There's a teal QR code there. So if you like the show, if you want to keep watching the show as we head to the finals and the virtual conference, I serve up a newsletter on every Sunday night with the show that's coming up, the replays, but also best practices and articles that you can use to upgrade your digital literacy as a procurement professional. And I know, Gary, on the TYS side, you also wanted to share a resource for folks who would be interested in learning more.
Yeah, if you want to continue the conversation, a lot of good territory we covered here, but it's tip of the iceberg, right? So click the QR code. We'd be glad to give anyone interested a demo, or if you just want to reach out to us on LinkedIn or connect with PK and I after the session, be delighted to talk with you, talk shop, and we can talk about not bringing the burglar into the room until you ring the alarm. You know, get the suppliers right, pre-vet it, right? But and Joel just wanted to, we very much appreciate this opportunity, right, to share our thoughts and our insights, and we thank everybody here that attended and participated in the show today. And we hope everyone took a little bit away from this session, and we'll see you all down the road.
Yeah, because to that point, right, you're coming back on the show another 2 times during the season.
A couple weeks,
so
right?
I'm sure we'll be able to help melt that iceberg a little bit more for people as we go. So thank you very much for coming on the show, PK, Gary, today. Everybody watching, we'll have you have a great weekend, and we'll see you again next week. Talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joel.